Hello everyone, today we are going to take a look at the TinyHawk Lite FPV combo kit. Inside this box contains everything one would typically need to get started in FPV, analog FPV that is. And as you can see here on the back of the box, we have the quad, we have the radio, and we have the goggles. The radio and the goggles you could use on other analog quads. I believe this is the E3 transmitter. But the main difference in this combination of the TinyHawk Lite versus Emax previous combo kit offerings is this version offers real BetaFlight experience. And if you're starting out in FPV, there's one important step you need to take before you dive into BetaFlight at all, and I'll show you that a little later in the video. As I've got laid out here in front of us, this is everything that comes with the kit. It even includes USB cables. Everything charges via USB. Even the batteries, it comes with a charger, which this has the connections on this side as well as our USB connection. Do note that this is Emax's own proprietary connector. You won't find this on other batteries, although you can, with some soldering, change out the leads on both the battery and the quad side to use other batteries if you choose to. That's generally not something I suggest for someone just starting out. And so you might want to get additional batteries. Emax did send this for review, and they sent me some extra batteries that I have used in this review. One other thing to note about the goggles is the monitor does detach from the main visor interface so that you can attach that with this attachment to the top of the, it has a little pull out here, so you have a little accessory you can attach in here, and then you can put the screen on top so you can fly even without the goggles. This does not have a DVR in it, so I am going to have to use my HD0 goggles, which cost about 3 or 4 times as much as this entire kit. In order to be able to show you the flight footage, I do have a screen recording of the monitor that I can kind of show you the representation, but of course that is not necessarily the true experience that you would experience inside the goggles. Speaking of one additional feature of the goggles, they do telescope out. See if I can do this on camera very well. You can see that it's got 3 notch points right here on the side. And so you can telescope those out to accommodate differences in your vision. As you probably saw in the beginning of the video, I wear glasses, and with this extended to the furthest point, I can just about see it as clearly as I would expect, but not quite. So you may find that the accessory to attach the monitor to the radio comes in handy for starting your FPV journey. What we'll be flying here is the TinyHawk Lite, and the most important feature to note about this is it uses brushed motors. Now, brushed motors is not what we've been using most recently. We've most recently been using much smaller and lighter brushless motors. Brushless motors are more responsive. They tend to output more thrust and tend to run longer. Over time, these will wear down, so you will have to replace those. Thankfully, in this particular situation, we can replace those without having to do any soldering because it does have connectors. We take the screws out of the bottom, pull this off the top, and then we can put the connector right in, and you just push down replacement motors that you can see are color coordinated by their direction of spin, black and white versus red and blue. So you want to make sure, maybe take a picture before you swap out your motors. But brush motors are, in micros, what we started out with when I got started. We're going to take a look at some flight footage. Again, this is recorded on my HD0 goggles, which cost $650 to $700. So this kit should debut around $160. I'll have a link down in the video description if you want to check it out, whether it's available not only from Emax but from other resellers. I'll include as many as I can. Although I believe when you're watching this, I'm going to be on a little trip, so I may be slightly delayed with finding other resellers that have this. But as you can see, I've started out with the native OSD. This is how it's shipped. Normally, I move these things around. But in the bottom left, it says angle mode, and you can correlate that on the radio to what they call the beginner mode. And here I'm just kind of pushing it side to side, and this shows the active element of angle mode, that it's always going to be trying to make the quad flat. Flat as to its last calibration. So when you let off the stick, it's going to try to go back to flat. Whether the stick is pointing in the pitch direction, which is forward on the right stick, or roll, which is left and right on the right stick, you do have to control yaw and throttle on your own. That is not part of angle mode. But we're going to fly it around here a little bit. This isn't my native format. Also, something you should know about this recording is I've included flight audio. That is not something that you get natively with the quad. You may be able to tell on the table as I fly by, there is a cell phone camera sitting there, and that is where I got the flight audio. As we bring it down, you can see we've flown about a minute and a half. I'm going to switch into horizon mode, which corresponds to the intermediate mode as labeled on the radio. It's also worth noting that on the radio, at least as I received it, it has flip over after crash, which is not something this quad can do because it's brushed. I think that label is there because this radio has been used in a number of different kits, and some of those other quads did have flip over after crash capabilities. This one does not. So if you crash and you land upside down, or if you're not in an upright position, you will have to walk to get it. And as you can see in horizon mode, or what they label intermediate mode, we can definitely fly a little bit faster. It's a little bit more agile, but it's still doing some self-stabilization. But what we call the strength, or the quickness, or as it's trying to go back to flat or level as its last calibration, is a little bit slower to respond. It gives us more freedom. It allows us, if you want to take the route of moving from intermediate, or from beginning to intermediate to expert mode. Expert mode is where you control all access. If you let off the stick, it's just going to stay at the angle that you get. And as I fly around the table, I do that because oftentimes when I fly in the house, people presume to fly inside you have to have lots of space to enjoy a whoop inside, which I consider this a whoop. It's got prop protection or ducts around the propellers, but you don't have to have a lot of space in order to be able to fly and have some fun inside your home. And with that, you not only do you not need a lot of space, you don't need to have good weather. Oftentimes with our quads, we need to have good weather or reasonable weather so that we can go outside and fly. Because you can't fly in rain, but inside you can fly rain, cold, hot, whatever, and you're comfortable. You can take this outside, and I'll show you a little bit of that footage. And you can see also that I get down in the basement and my reception is fairly good with my HD0 goggles. It's not quite as good with the Emax goggles. You could probably improve this by flying raceband 8. Raceband is generally, as you see in the top right, R is raceband. Raceband 8 is my preferred channel because I find it gets the best reception in my house. The race band in general is up above our traditional home Wi-Fi signal, so we won't get interference nearly as much as we would on other channels. Something else to note about that is the quad as well as the goggles already come tuned to the channel that you need to fly. Now sometimes you can get a close channel if you're using auto scan on the goggles, but you find on a close channel or frequency like 5796, let's just say that's the channel that you're, or the frequency you're on, but you're not on 5796, it will get you reception, but as you fly further away, that reception will quickly fade off. That's when you know you're not on the exact right frequency. We break these frequencies down by channel and by band, which you can go into through the OSD, through the goggles, using the radio, or you can also plug it into BetaFlight and look at the channel that it's on, and then make sure your goggles are set to that channel as well. That's a question I get a lot about reception, and oftentimes when the channel changes, either inadvertently or we forget which channel we changed to, we then have to find that precise channel on our goggles in order to get the reception that we're expecting. But you can see there we've flown around for over 4 minutes. In general, when I flew inside on the 750 milliamp batteries that are included with the kit, I got about 6 minutes of flight time. But because the charger does not storage charge, which is important to your long-term health of your batteries, I do recommend you stop the flight at about 3.45 volts. That's in the bottom left-hand corner. That will get you close to 3.8 volts when you disarm and land. So not immediately, it will come back up to 3.8 volts, but after you disarm and the quad sits there on your landing or crashing spot, the battery is no longer under as much load, and therefore the voltage will start to come back up. So 3.45 is about where I would suggest normally ending your flights because the charger does not have storage charge capability. Storage charge is typically 3.8 or 3.85 volts, and that will help keep your batteries healthy, so you'll be able to enjoy more flights on these batteries. If you fly them all the way down as I am here, then you will find that over time, because you're not keeping them at storage charge, that they won't perform as well and you won't have as much flight time. But let's move on to our next flight, which shows a little bit more of the different capabilities of the quad. Here's we take off. You can see it says air mode in the bottom right hand corner. And air mode corresponds to expert mode. Now that means that the props are always spinning even when you're at 0 throttle. They only stop when you disarm. And it also means that we have to control all axis. In other words, pitch, roll, yaw, throttle is all up to us. The quad is not trying to do any sort of self-stabilization or try to bring it back to level as it is in the other two modes. Now, some people jump right into learning air mode, oftentimes called acro as well. Other people, like myself, I progressed through different levels, and I have a video short on what I did. I can link that down in the video description or put a card in the top right-hand corner if you care to watch that. But this shows you that you have more freedom, more control. In angle mode, you can't do any flips and rolls, and our pitch angle is controlled, where you can't go as far forward or as far back. In horizon mode, you can get a little bit more greater of an angle forward or back. Oops, crashed. Now I got to go pick it up. Now you can see we've reset there a little bit. My reception's not great right over here. In horizon mode, as I was saying, it's not as strong as angle mode, and horizon mode does allow us to do flips and rolls, which I'll demonstrate in an outside flight. Inside, when it comes to beginner stuff and a brushed quad, flips and rolls are very challenging. I would not try to do that inside. You'll need a little bit more space because these brush motors just don't respond like our current technology with brushless motors that can produce more thrust as well as just be more overall responsive. But I see after my crash, I switched back into air mode, and we see a little bit more flight footage. Now, something else about my video reception, where I'm sitting matters in my video reception. I have a video on this as well. If I move around the house and fly in different spots, it changes the video reception. And as you can see, when I come back to the stairs, it gets a little bit better, but when I get further away from the stairs, which is kind of the opening, the reception kind of fades out a little bit, which is normal. Of course, our house is made of traditional U.S. construction, which is wood and sheetrock. Also, if you fly in an apartment that has concrete structures and metal structures, you may find your reception is grossly different than what I have displayed here in this video. Something to be aware of. Let's move on to that outside flight. Outside, it's a very calm day, 6 miles an hour on the wind, and that is what I suggest for something like this, is very, very low winds. Or if your wind measurement as far as weather information on the internet goes, that it's you're somewhat protected, as I am here in the backyard. Here I'm in horizon mode, which is the intermediate mode, just showing that you can do flips and rolls. And what it does is when you let off the stick, it finds level again. So once you get kind of inverted and over the top more than 180 degrees, it will find flat again for you. So you don't have to have the timing down perfect like you do in expert mode, where you're in complete control and there's no self-leveling. And we fly around a little bit in horizon mode, just kind of displaying how it flies outside. Starting out, I would suggest that you start outside, or at the very least maybe a parking garage if you have access to that. That's a nice calm indoor space that generally has more space than most homes. But if you do have, say, a barn, or there's an indoor flying group that you are aware of and you can join, then that's also another good space. But when you fly outside with something like this, you do want to have good calm wind. You don't want to have a lot of wind because it's small. It has a lot of surface area the wind can push against, and it doesn't combat that well. So I would say 10 mile an hour max when it comes to flying this outside. We're going to land here. I'm going to switch into the expert mode, which says air mode down in the bottom right, and we're going to do a little bit more flying. You can see again about 1.5 minutes in. Also note in the top right hand corner, race mode 4, which we've already covered, but I'm flying at 400 milliwatts. This comes shipped at 25 milliwatts, which I believe is legal in all locations. And you need to check your local regulations as far as increasing that when it comes to the licensing and everything that you need if you're going to follow the local recommendations for this stuff. Typically when we fly FPV, we want to output as much video power. That's the milliwatts, the 400. We want to output as much as we can so we can get as clear an image with our quad. I don't suggest flying something like this far away. That's something that more experienced microflyers might do, but because this is a beginner kit, I would keep it fairly close in, especially if you're around much vegetation, because you can, if you go down in a crash, you got to be able to find it. And the smaller the quad, and the thicker the brush, or stuff that you're in, the harder it is to find. So something I keep, I'll remind you of. Previously, you saw me do a couple of flips and rolls, and in this mode, you have to be precise with your timing. So you have to nail it when it's flat, or you have to make a quick adjustment. So a little bit more skill set. Then I just did a couple of punch outs by the chimney. That was full throttle. That was maximum power. So not a high performer. Me, myself, my opinion on this is a little bit, I'll use an analogy. When you start driving for the first time, you don't start with a sports car or supercar or a race car. You start out with something that's, a little bit slower, doesn't have as many features, maybe it's not quite as nice, and you get a hang of driving. And then you might progress later in life to where you have another car that maybe is a little bit nicer, has more features, maybe it is a little bit more responsive, whether it's power steering or just the overall power. And then maybe one day as an adult you get in, or as an older adult or older teenager or something, you get into racing. So it's kind of a progression that I see that this quad can take you on, much like driving does for most of us. I know I have never driven a race car. I drove a race go-kart when I was 15 or something like that. So even at that point, I'd already done some driving before I stepped into something that was more higher performance. But everybody is a unique individual. But that was one analogy that I thought of when it comes to the performance of this versus, some of our current modern day whoops that are much more agile and produce more thrust and are much quicker. Whereas this will also make it easier to learn to fly because you are not getting out of control so quickly. You can't correct as much, because if you get out of control, correcting is more challenging because you don't have as much power. But this kit is all about price. Again, should be debuting around $160. Again, the goggles I'm recording this with are $650 to $700 to give you some idea of the overall expense. And this quad is much like the quads that I got started with in micros back, 2017, thereabouts. We were still flying brushed, I believe. Brushless came about, and it was a big deal. And we saw a lot more performance. But it can provide challenges with that performance of learning the skill set needed to control that performance. Let's go ahead and go back to the desk and just kind of wrap up here a little bit. So we're here at BetaFlight, and the first step that you need to take when you get a new quad, and I'm guilty of this as well, I think everyone needs to be doing this step, experts as well as those just starting out, is plug in your quad, as I'm doing here off camera, and then you see here in the BetaFlight configuration application that it says COM3 in my particular case. Won't always say COM3, but it will give you a COM port, and it'll say something like STM32F411, which is the flight controller inside this quad. We're going to connect, and then we're going to drop down to the CLI, and we're going to type down here in the CLI dump. Hit enter. It outputs every setting, all settings, the defaults, customized, anything that's in the BetaFlight, which is the software on the flight controller that controls the quad. And then we're going to save that to file, and you can give it any name you want, and then you click save. You can go ahead and clear the output, and I would also recommend doing a diff. The diff is all the settings of BetaFlight that are custom, so not the BetaFlight default. So they're specific to this quad. We hit enter. It outputs all those settings. We do the same thing. We save to file. We can give it a name. And from there, I would recommend not storing that on your local computer. So I would email it to yourself as a really good, cheap. The file is small, so you can put it in your email storage, whether you're using Gmail or any other sort of cloud-based services, which most of us are now. And that way you have that stored away that if you do dive in to get that real BetaFlight experience and you make a change and then you can't remember what that change is, you can always reset by copying that file into the CLI. Hit enter, type save, hit enter again. Now you're back to the factory default settings. So a few details that I didn't already cover is it uses rubber bands, which they do have a couple of extras here in our accessory kit that you can replace these, because these will, like any rubber band, they'll dry out, they'll crack, they'll break over time. In order to put the new rubber bands on, you do have to remove the screws from this bottom piece, pull that off, and then loop the rubber bands back around. Again, the battery connector is Emax new proprietary connector that only works with their batteries. Of course, as I said previously, you can do some soldering and change this out if you want to use different sizes of batteries. It does come with extra props. I don't know how much you're going to need these though. The main thing to note about these props is they are different motor stem size as what we oftentimes see when you go looking for these props. I believe the size on these are 1 millimeter, or are they 0.9? I'm forgetting now all of a sudden. So you might want to look that up. Brushed motors have a smaller motor stem, therefore the motor hole that the prop has, the motor stem hole the prop has, is also smaller. We need to make sure that that matches, or the prop will just spin off. Also, the prop orientation, by orientation means the direction that it spins. The high side of the prop, hopefully you can tell, this is the high side, leads the rotation of the motor. So this is a traditional nose in rotation and tail in. And you can go motors out, which spins the other way, but you have to reverse the motor, so you have to move the motors around, and then you have to have props. Now, some people do put props on upside down, and then they find that you have to go really high on the throttle because the props are designed to create the maximum amount of thrust with the leading edge. So if it's upside down, you're not generating as much thrust, so you have to use more throttle. So if you find that, you know that you've got your props on upside down. So turn them over, but make sure the rotation matches. Otherwise, the quad will freak out. It's got a USB-C port right up here. It does have adjustable camera angle. You can kind of see the angle that I was flying this at. To change the angle, just take your screwdriver. Does it include a screwdriver? I see a little blue screwdriver here in the kit. Loosen those up, and then you can use your finger to just kind of gently push it up and down, and then re-secure it. You may need to hold the camera in place with, say, your fingernail. You're tightening the screws to keep it from moving. But again, this is the camera angle that I was flying at. This is our video reception antenna, and this is our Express LRS antenna, which goes to our controller. So this is a screen recording of the monitor. Now you can see there's some grid lines on there. This is something that my camera picked up. I cannot see this when I'm looking at the monitor myself, but I wanted to show you this. Of course, the color representation is off. You can see by the outside of the monitor, the camera sees the rest of the color representation normally, but when you're filming this, it's just a little bit off. But this gives you an idea of the reception that the goggles do get. Of course, depending upon your environment, you could find that replacing one or both of the antennas with a circular polarized antenna may help in your environment to get better reception. A little fewer of those lines, or what we oftentimes call breakup. And as I fly downstairs here, I'm going to have my crash, but we'll start over again. This is the same flight that you already saw previously. You can see my reception as I sit back down. You can kind of even see my shadow. That's another problem with doing this screen recording, is there's a window behind me and it's daylight time, so I get a fair bit of sun mixture in there with the reflections. But I wanted to show you this just to make sure I was very clear about the reception that the goggles do get versus what I saw. If you want to do a direct comparison, what you might want to do is just open the video on two different tabs if you're on a computer, in order to be able to maybe put the video of this flight side by side. Again, this is the flight that I used in expert mode inside, which I showed earlier in the video, and you can line up the time on those on the two different tabs of your browser, and then look at them side by side to see the difference between the DVR footage, which I showed you from my HD0 goggles, versus this screen recording that I did with the cell phone on the monitor that does come with the kit, so that you can get, again, a really good idea of what your expectation should be for the video reception if your environment is like mine. That should cover pretty much everything you need to know to get started at FPV. This seems to be like a kit that they might be kind of targeting at that Christmas market, being we're only a couple of months away from that. And again, it comes in around $160 or $159.99. You know how the pricing is. Again, I am probably on a trip as you're watching this, so I will try to, when this does launch, I will try to add other resellers. So those of you that don't want to purchase directly from Emax, or you want to shop around, it might be available on Banggood or AliExpress or Get FPV or Race Day Quads or Pyro Drone. It could be available in a lot of different places. Otherwise, if you're interested in this product and you don't want to look for the links, or I don't have them up yet, just use your fingers on your keyboard on your computer or your mobile device and just type Emax TinyHawk Lite combo kit, and that should pull up some results to where you can do some online shopping of your own. If you do have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.